Here we are, and I appreciate it. And it looks like somebody else is rolling. I'm going to start over again. Actually, this will probably be the beginning. Let's say this is the beginning, and Joel's on his way.
Cold open.
And actually, the first thing I wanted to ask everybody, well, first let me say thank you to each of you. This was a bit of an experimental idea, and I really appreciate seeing each of you. I admire each and every one of you. Hey, Joel. So we're going to focus on the very last scene in Twin Peaks: The Return, season 3. What year is this scene? And that's it. We're going to just stick with that. So the opening question I have, just to hear from everybody, is if you could characterize your initial reaction or your initial experience with that scene the first time you watched it, maybe in one word, possibly one phrase, or at the most one sentence. And this might be the experience like building up to the scene, or actually watching the scene, or maybe the feeling you had after the scene was over. Whoever wants to go first, a word, a phrase, or a sentence. What was your experience?
Well, I'll start. For me, I would describe it as just growing unease into devastation.
I'll piggyback off that because the word that came to mind, for at least from my first watch through, was devastating.
Yeah, mine was spine chilling.
I think mine was dumbfounded. I do think that was my initial thing. It was,
Yeah, I think I was pretty stunned by it, but at the same time, I wasn't totally surprised. I assumed it wasn't going to end conclusively.
Yeah, and I was pretty psyched that it was great. But I was also quite perplexed. But I was just so happy about how amazing it was. And hi, Joel. Joel Bacco just got here. And Joel, nice to see you. Either way is good. Camera or on or off is fine. Your preference.
Okay. Well, since I'm already on the phone, I'll do the camera on, I think.
Cool. So, nice to see you.
Sounds okay.
You too. Actually, I take it off as I adjust it, but I'll answer your question, I guess. For me, part 18, the biggest surprise may have been, and I think someone else may have alluded to this, that I knew it was coming because I had seen the scene leaked on TMZ, as many others did, and assumed it would be earlier in the show. And for that to be the climax, I think, it added to what would already have been sort of a disorienting scene to be like also a little upset that I wasn't going to be surprised by the end of a Lynch project. So it was like, in a perverse way, almost more upsetting that was the case.
I'm curious how many people had known about that scene ahead of time. I did not. I had been very careful to keep myself away from anything regarding the new Twin Peaks. I knew very, very little, and I did not know anything about that scene. So
I was aware of it from TMZ. I don't know if I saw a clip, but I was at least aware enough from either that they were at the Palmer house and what it looked like, that when part 18, as it was unfolding, I was like, oh, that's going to be the end of it. So I had that thought watching it, but I didn't know anything beyond what was going to happen. But other than it was just Laura Palmer and Cooper, that was all I knew.
I was aware of it through like the DUGPA board and stuff like that, but had forgotten about it by the time the show actually came around.
Yeah, I didn't watch the show until September or October 2020, and I just kind of like went through the whole thing right in order. Didn't look anything up, so I had no idea. But I did know there was like 7 minutes left. So I was like, what the heck is gonna happen now?
I do remember looking at the clock as the episode was ticking down,
Mhm.
realizing we had only a few minutes left, and it seemed like there was an awful lot that could be addressed. And so I think that's when I think I knew before that, but I knew we were kind of driving on a lost highway. We weren't gonna get there early.
Yeah, in fact, that long drive that Cooper and Carrie Page take, that's when I looked at the clock because I was like, wait a second, where is
Right.
this going? And there's not much time left. And so I started, getting concerned, I guess, at that point about
Yeah.
what was going to be completed or wrapped up at that point.
Yeah, and I think because I came to Twin Peaks much later in the whole history of it. I remember feeling like it can't, my overwhelming feeling was it can't be over. Like I didn't really understand what the end was going to mean. I was just feeling very self-involved with the fact that we weren't going to have any more,
Yeah. Did anybody have like a initial like interpretive reaction right away? Because the very first instinct I had was that this was some sort of like disassociation type
Mm.
thing happening, and then maybe coming back together. But I was like, mostly baffled. But that was like the first impulse I had. Does anybody remember any impulse they had as far as like meaning in any way? Or was it more feeling?
For me, it really was a lot about, even after the scene, just the feeling of that final image of her whispering in his ear. Like I feel like my mind was blown for at least a few minutes afterward. I don't think I had any thoughts.
Yeah, I believe it.
Mhm.
To keep us on a little bit on schedule, and by all means, let me just say this up front. Anybody at any point wants to take over sort of the mic or like the moderator type position, or just wants to riff, by all means, feel free. So, but at the same time, I'm gonna follow like a little bit of a loose schedule because this is very new for me to have this many people, and I want to respect everybody's time. So Andrew and I were talking before we started tonight, and he's a pretty accomplished poet, and I was telling him, in my classroom, I teach 8th grade and I tutor high school. When I give students poetry that's, I would say, like above their level as far as being able to kind of understand what's happening or to interpret, the approach that we typically take is we'll sort of just get like a collection of like poetic elements that are available to look at. And if it's hard to, we'll just like pick random poetic elements and just look at them one at a time and kind of like just piecemeal start piecing together what we can say about the poem. And then often we'll get somewhere kind of interesting. So this is obviously not an 8th grade or high school class. This is not an 8th grade text either. This text is very, I think, very sophisticated, I would say. And so I'm kind of thinking of taking that approach. And then I heard John talk once about the concept of story versus discourse. And that reminded me of what I was just saying. So John, if you don't mind, can you just give us like a little quick snapshot of what that means?
Sure. I should say when I did my master's thesis, I studied a thing called narrative theory, and narrative theory does a lot to break down how stories are told. On a very, very basic level, a story has two elements. It's the story, which is what happened, and it's the discourse, which is how the story is told to us. There's a lot more to narrative theory, but those two are sort of the basic fundamental components. And the thing that happens with a David Lynch film or an artist of David Lynch's caliber is oftentimes we're trying to figure out not only the story, but also the discourse. So the discourse, so for an example, a story can be a story is just a simple chronological A to B to C, what happened. The discourse is how that story is told. So it could be told non-chronologically through flashbacks, and it could be told perhaps through an unreliable narrator so that we don't know for sure if we can trust what we're watching or reading is the truth. And so with the David Lynch film, I think sometimes we jump to story and try to figure out the story, and we forget to think about the discourse, which is how is Lynch telling us this story. So anyway, those are the basic components.
And yeah, so when the what is going on is hard, and it's certainly hard for me to grasp in this scene, and really throughout much of the return. It's kind of hard to figure out exactly what's happening. Then we could look a little bit into the how, and we're going to focus on something because it's impossible to look at everything at once. So Courtney, do you have a preference?
I think I prefer performance.
Allison?
Yeah, same, performance.
Okay. Andrew?
I'll focus on camera
Patrick?
work.
Mhm.
Oh, editing, I guess.
Okay. Joel?
What are the ones that are left on there?
Anything sound related?
Yeah, sound.
Different, maybe. There's a lot going on with editing, so you could do that as well if you wanted to. Some of the mise en scène stuff, which I probably mispronounced that.
Yeah, I'll do sound.
Okay. John?
My sound setup's not great now, so somewhat based on memory, but maybe I'll plug my headphones in.
Okay. John?
Yeah, I know camera work's been selected, but I certainly would like to talk about that too.
Okay.
Talk about any, if we need to talk about
it's gonna just open up once we all get started. I'm gonna look at, I think, what could I actually handle? I'll look at props, see if I could find anything. I have not watched this scene since last summer. In fact, I have not watched an episode of Twin Peaks since last summer. I have no idea why, but I haven't. I've listened to it. I've done audio only episodes, which was pretty good. But anyway, let's see. Hi.
and
I had to put myself in the dark so that I could actually
Right.
see. Would anybody like to share any current thoughts?
I watched the whole episode last night, and then I watched it again this morning, and I feel like I'm always amazed at, no matter when I see it and how many times I see it, it always feels somewhat different, and I can see different things in it. I mean, I range from emotions. I kind of felt sad just now in a way that I don't think I felt that earlier when I watched it. I mean, I felt like this morning when I watched it, I had almost like a more of an empowered feeling by it. So I think the context in which you watch it, maybe what's happening in your environment at the time, or the time of day, or how you're feeling, can actually maybe influence your reaction to it. It's a fucking killer scene. Pardon my French.
Yeah. What were you? Was there anything you were looking at in particular or focusing on?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've done, as I mentioned to you, Anthony, when you emailed me about this, I was very upfront with the fact that when it comes to Twin Peaks, I am the first one to admit I'm a total follower. I don't theorize. I don't have a lot of experience doing that. And I read a ton, I keep John's book with me a lot. I just love the theory of it. And so I really just in the last couple of days tried to think without over trying too hard to come up with something unique and different, which would be absolutely impossible at this point. I think the thing that I got from it this time really might be more in line with, what Courtney's focused on, which is my own trauma as it relates to the story, and what looking at Laura just in terms of, at this very basic level, her reaction to the trigger of the trauma. Even watching it, I mean, I get splotchy, and it's really hitting me in a certain way as I relate it to the tether of mother and daughter, and the generational trauma that comes through, and just hearing that voice, and just just the sheer reaction of her, regardless of the stuff of Twin Peaks, just on its face in that moment, you know. So anyway, it hit me in a very specific way this time.
Yeah, thank you. This will be the last time that I sort of like call on people to go next. But of course I'm happy to do that. But I saw Andrew nodding really heavily as you were talking. Would you mind following up?
Well, I mean, I just think about it in the context of the very, very end of it, and how, like, you know, you go into this world, be it Judy's world or whatever, and it's like you're assigned some other identity, right? You could be Richard, you could be Linda, you could be Carrie Page. And Dale Cooper seems to retain himself, right? He answers or gives his name at the door as Special Agent Dale Cooper. And it's just, when you think of it as like this dark dream, and he asks, you know, what year is this? The kind of question you might ask that can turn a dream lucid or could wake you up. And it's at that moment that we cut to Laura, and we hold on her pretty much for the rest of the thing. And it's like that moment of what seems to be like her own awakening, right? The return of Laura Palmer and everything that happened to her in its kind of, you know, horrific entirety is really affecting, you know, like almost beyond words. And that's just, yeah, that's what I was thinking, just based on like the way that trauma kind of comes into her in that moment, you know. Just, you know, what can you say? Cheryl Lee scream.
Yeah, it always seems like that question seems to unlock something, you know, either in the air and also within her, because well, I'm not sure who was looking at performance, but I would imagine that was part of, you know, part of what you might have observed. Like her performance certainly changes as he utters that question. But Courtney?
Oh yes, I was looking at performance, and I agree with Allison. Like every time I watch that scene or watch part 18 or watch The Return, I notice something different, and it is sometimes because I'm approaching it differently. And you know, John's written a lot about this. People have talked about how like it's Twin Peaks is so much of what you bring to it, of your own self, and that's what's so great about people having different interpretations. Sometimes, you know, we all have our own different interpretations, but sometimes, you know, vastly from each other. And what I was noticing is, you know, there's so much, like, what's so striking about this like last part of the entire Return is how quiet and like measured it is. And Cheryl Lee, watching her performance, where she's almost taking everything in, but not really revealing. You know, there's no sense of, like what Andrew was saying, there's no sense that this is Cheryl Lee until that moment. But there's a sense that, you know, Cooper's there. But so she's playing it as kind of wide-eyed, I don't know what's going on, but I'm going along with it. And even when they walk back down the stairs, and then you're right, when Cooper says, "What year is it?" You begin to see Cheryl Lee's taking like deeper breaths. It's almost like she's inhaling more. Something is happening to her, and she's no longer that wide-eyed taking it in. Like she is something is transpiring. And that scream, like that's why I think it's spine chilling, is that scream. Like I get chills just talking about it right now.
Same.
It's so powerful.
Something else that sticks out there that I really like about that the scene in a performance context is how like how interestingly each character kind of modulates the idea of confusion, because that's such a great point, that like for Carrie it's this kind of wide-eyed, like, what am I doing here kind of confusion. But for Dale, it's much more focused. Like he's confused, but he's looking for something. You know what I mean? What's the clue? What am I doing here? You know, it's like a much more kind of focused and purposeful sense of you know, searching than hers, which is like, you know, why am I with this guy almost, you know?
She also looks sleepy to me, which I know they've been driving through the night, but it seems very intentional, that very slow eye blinking, and I mean, you can read a lot of different things into it. And the other thing that I noticed this time that I had never noticed before, I noticed it this morning, is when Cooper reaches out to her, first of all, it's that weird hand holding. And when he's with her in the forest and he leads her by the hand, it's almost like it reminded me of when we were in kindergarten and we used to hold hands and walk around kind of, far apart from one another. It had sort of a juvenile feeling of it to me. But in this time, I heard him say to her, "Come on." And I had never heard that before. Maybe it was because today I listened to it on my computer with my headphones, and it's definitely a different experience when you do that. And that piece of it really, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure why it impacted me so much, but I can't stop thinking about it, that he said that to her. Come on. Like, I don't know. It was just an observation, but the performances are incredible when I feel at certain points that they're walking in unison together. It's got so many layers in it.
Yeah, I had a couple thoughts based off of that. I was listening to the sound this time. That was the kind of focus that I chose or was assigned or whatever. But first of all, before I get to that, just that idea that she seems almost like sleepy or tired or something. I always felt watching it, she looks almost like she's mesmerized a little, like she's in a trance.
Mhm.
The way Cheryl Lee plays it on the doorstep, your eyes kind of shift. Your eyes generally kind of go to Cooper because he's the one talking. But if you kind of look over at what she's doing while he's talking, she's kind of like, her head's almost like swimming, like her eyes, like sort of like Courtney talked about too. And as far as the sound goes, I too listened to it with headphones this time and really was mostly concentrating on the sound more than some of the other elements. And what I kind of noticed was it was really all ambience. There's no music, which is maybe one of the more notable things about it, even though there's a lot less music in The Return generally than in Twin Peaks. In this particular episode, I think there's less music even than most of The Return. So it's all ambiance. And what the ambiance is like crickets chirping for most of the scene. That's what you hear. And because there's, between the lines and at certain points, there's not much dialogue at all. As soon as they get out of the car, it's like a whole blanket of kind of bug sounds, particularly I would assume crickets or cicadas, or I'm not. Lynch would probably know much better than me, not just because he's the one who did it, but because he's a bug guy, what exactly that sound is. But it's sort of, for one thing, it makes you think of the frog bug. And I would assume, microphones are going to pick up some stuff, but usually they've got, I think, pretty good control over tuning out what is in the background and then adding that as like an ambiance in the post-production usually. So I would assume there's some choice in that. It's interesting that as you get to the end of the scene, you hear the crickets a little less. You start to hear wind sounds. As soon as they go down the steps and are walking, there's like a little bit of like a wind in the distance, kind of. And that picks up more and more. And I noticed by the end, by the time she screams, the cricket sounds are almost like buried. Like I actually went back a couple times to listen to where exactly they fade away. They never quite do, but you hear like this sort of almost wind tunnel-y effect at times. It gets a little more heightened and strange as they're like walking down the steps and pausing, and he's looking at the ground and all of that. So, and I think all of that very subtle, mostly naturalistic sound also sets up the subversion at the end of the scene, which is so sound-based, where we hear Sarah's voice coming in from apparently nowhere, and then of course the scream. So that it's sort of a nice build-up to that, aesthetically speaking, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point I hadn't thought of, like how that all that's near silence contrasts with just like there's a lot of booming sounds at the end of the scene, and then
yeah, and also too that there's no real neighborhood sounds, which fits in with just how quiet the town is when they're driving in. Like you don't hear. I know it's at night. You don't really know what time. He asked what year it is. You could also ask what time is it. It's not entirely clear. It seems like they've been driving and it's been night nonstop. There's no daytime driving scenes of them coming all the way from Texas. So there's something odd going on there. And it's like, it's funny too, to think a couple things that are off screen. Again, this knowledge of how this film was seen and where it was filmed and all of that kind of bleeding into it a little for some of us maybe. But I saw a picture recently of a view from the Palmer House, and you can see the whole, I don't know if it's the Sound or something. There's a whole body of water right there, like maybe a few 100 feet away, or at least it looks pretty close. Maybe it's a little further, but it's like right there out the window. And that kind of surprised me. And I was wondering this time if I was almost hearing a little bit, because I don't know how much ambience they picked up for kind of like, hold out to boom and collect some noise to then use later in post.
Yeah, I don't think you're not close enough to the water there to get the water sound.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's much further
one
away than that. It's just the
Okay.
perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, because that's the one of the locations that I did not get to when I was out there a few years ago. So I was like shocked to see the picture and just be like, "There's water there." But then the other thing is, there's always a crew off screen, so there's gonna be dozens of people there regardless. But there was also a crowd of like hundreds of, or maybe about 100 or more fans just standing there watching the whole thing being filmed. So it's funny to see those pictures from TMZ as well. And I guess if there's a positive spin I can put on having all that extra information that you really weren't supposed to have, it's this idea that we're in a sort of enclosed bubble, yet there's something maybe just outside the bubble that is ready to burst forth. So I guess that would be one way to look at it metatextually, maybe. But with, in this world, that's this Judy's world, there's something that's just right there that Cooper can't reach, and ultimately Laura can and does.
We'll come back to that last point. That's interesting. I'm sorry if I cut whoever was going next off, but
I was just going to go back to performance and talk a little bit about McLaughlin and his performance of Cooper in this scene. And I think it's really interesting because, as I've studied Lynch's films, I've come to feel more and more strongly that, he is trying to put us in the mind of the characters and feel kind of the experience the characters are feeling. And McLaughlin is his Cooper is confused. His Cooper is struggling. Even before he comes down the stairs, he's struggling, when they're driving in the car and he's asking her questions about, do you recognize anything? Because this is not going the way he expected it to. And certainly as the scene progresses, he's sort of stymied again and again. She doesn't recognize the house. They go up the stairs. Sarah Palmer's not there, etc. And it just goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the conversation is we are experiencing exactly what Cooper is experiencing. We are confused in this scene. We've arrived at the end, and Cooper has too, and he's expecting something to happen, and we are too, and we can't make sense of it, and neither can he. And so I feel like McLaughlin captures that beautifully in the scene, and I think it's very effective because he is embodying our experience at home as we are watching that scene, because we are lost, and so is he.
Do you think Laura is embodying that experience as well, or not?
No,
Cheryl, I should say.
I know. I would go back to what Courtney was saying, and I've written a little bit about this in my book. Is that whatever that character is there, I do believe it's Carrie Page, but Laura is emerging slowly. Starts to emerge in the drive when she starts to talk about her past and saying, "I tried to keep a clean house," and I think Laura is starting to come out there. But I paid very careful attention when I was writing about this scene up to Cheryl Lee when she's on the doorstep. And we are looking at Cooper, but if you look at Cheryl Lee, she is sort of, she's very calm, and she's sort of got a sense of wonder about it all. She's looking around, and she's not really scared at that point. It's as if something is coming, and she's sort of aware of it, and she's not necessarily afraid of it at that point. it's very interesting to watch Charlie's performance there, because unlike Cooper, I mean, there may be a sense of confusion, or there may be a sense of uncertainty, but she's not panicking, and she's not worrying. It doesn't seem to me.
Do you think it's because she thinks it's about him? She doesn't realize that it's going to be about her? Because that was the one thing I kind of got a little bit of a feeling that she was thinking, I'm here because of him. You know, like for him, like he's got something that he's going through, and she's looking at him trying to figure out what is the thing that you're trying to get. Because he does have a really concerned and also anticipatory look on his face as he's coming up the steps.
Yeah, I think it might have something to do with that. I mean, I want to be careful not to, throw my theories around, because this is an open conversation about it all. But the story, even part 18, if we look at part 18 as a whole, it really is about Cooper. Yes, Laura is a crucial element, and she's the two most important characters in Twin Peaks are Dale Cooper and Laura Palmer. There's no doubt about it. And finally, here at the end of the return, at the end of part 18, those two characters are together. So she's a significant player for sure. But my theory has always been that Cooper's role was to bring her there, and he doesn't know why. He doesn't understand. Really, he's confused. He's confused throughout, and he gets more confused, and he doesn't realize he's done what he was supposed to do. He did exactly what he was supposed to do, was to get. Now, I've written about it. I won't go into it. She's there, and she's there for a reason.
I think Patrick, and thank God for Patrick, because he's going to tie together all these observations through the lens of edit. I think he noticed something in the editing that makes everything we all just said. No, was there anything that that I don't know that stood out?
I mean, I do I don't consider myself an editor, but I do some light editing for work and for my own stuff, and have for as long as I can remember. But it's funny because that was when I was watching the scene this time, and I've never watched it to focus on editing. That was what I was just like, oh, we cut here. Oh, we cut here. I was thinking of oh, there's a million different cuts going from Carrie to Dale to the steps going up to the Palmer house, which I think might be one of the most haunting shots in the scene when they're just walking up. It's just that one shot that's panning up to the house. Got kind of chills watching it this time. And then, because I was thinking about just the end. I mean, this is jumping, but there's just 20 seconds of black, after, before the credits even come in. And it felt way longer the first time I saw it. I was I could have sworn it was a minute. Just felt like time stopped. Not to play into the time stuff, but that was the kind of stuff that I was looking at this time. And just, and I think a lot of you, I had a lot more focus this time on Shirley's performance, thinking it was almost, I don't want to say a lost puppy-esque, but just the way she looked, it was just she was just on the porch, just, I'm just here. You know what you're doing. I'm just hanging out. Because I think back to when he picked her up at her house in Odessa, she was ready to go. She was psyched. It almost seemed okay, let's go. Let's get out the house. We're going on a road trip. But it was a long road trip, clearly, because now she's dazed. So, I don't know. I was probably a little all over the place, but I was definitely not looking so much at anything besides just the different cuts, and just I like how with a lot of Lynch's stuff, the scenes just play out, and you see beat after beat after beat, whereas sometimes you don't get you always feel like you're kind of there, you're I'm on the steps with them, and it doesn't feel, nothing ever feels rushed. So it's like a fly on the wall.
Yeah. Since you have a little editing experience, is there anything that let's say you were filming this scene or a similar scene, is there an approach that you would have taken that can contrast with how Lynch decided to film or edit this, because he's a legend and you
Right.
dabble. So
I dabble, and that's not a like I could never just say, oh, I would have done this. I'm not that person to do that, especially with anybody else's work. So that's very hard to say, because then that just starts getting me thinking, oh, well, what does all the raw footage look like? What is,
Mhm.
you know, what was maybe left on the cutting room floor? I'd be more curious of just, you know, what else I could have used, if anything. But
yeah,
I think it's pretty solid as is, because I mean, it's just a scene that I think about all the time.
Yeah.
So-
Oh, well, I mean, my implication was that you know, this scene was better than what any of us, you know, would have done if we were in that role.
Sure.
I was very fortunate. I was chatting a little bit with Mary Reber, who plays Alice Tremond in this scene, just like through Twitter and DMs. And she gave me a little info that was really interesting about the editing. And she said David Lynch told her to count, I think to count like to 8, or to count like to 8 or 10 in between each piece of dialogue between her and Kyle MacLachlan. I hope I'm not misquoting her. And he said, he's like, you could always cut, but you can't add more, you know, you can't add more space in. And so that was pretty cool. She also said that Kyle MacLachlan wanted to have his FBI badge on a lanyard, and David Lynch wanted him to have like the pull from the pocket thing. So I was looking at prompts, so that was like one thing that I noticed again. Each of the 3 characters had a small, like little, like this size circular type of metal. Agent Cooper had his FBI pin, which he doesn't have a lot of the time in the show. Excuse me. Shirley had like the horseshoe necklace that I think a lot of people have talked and speculated about. I have no personal thoughts about that at all. And then Mary Reber had like a little heart shaped, like little, I don't know, they were all the same size. I don't think any of this is significant, but she also said that David Lynch wanted her to wear her own, like all her own clothes. And I think she said that before her. And she said that she watched him write the scene. And then when he was done writing the scene, he like came up to her. He's like, hey, you want to be in this? Basically, they did, I think on the front lawn or something, they sat in a circle in chairs and they just rehearsed it kind of briefly. And then they got it in 2 takes. Other prop stuff that I saw, the house across the street had a light on. So like the interior lights were on. So I guess there, you know, there are people there. And then I just noticed that various houses had like their front porch lights on, but no one seemed to be awake except for that house across the street.
Wouldn't make it.
Jumped out props wise.
I wouldn't make an assumption that just because the lights were on, there were people there.
Yeah.
As they drive through town, there's
Right.
lights, but we never ever see anyone in the town. We don't see anyone when they cross the bridge. The Double R Diner's shut down, and they drive through the town. The lights are on. There's no one. There's no other cars on the road. There's no one on the sidewalks. There's no one in the windows of the houses. There's no one in the windows of the houses of the Palmer House when they pull up. All the lights are on in every room. So I think that was deliberate.
That goes back to Joel's like, what time is this? Instead of what
Yeah.
year is this? Because I'm like, did they roll up at 3 a.m.? Wait, what?
Yeah, it feels like it.
One of my favorite made up theories, and to be clear, I made this up, knowing it obviously was not the case. I don't, ascribe psychic talents to David Lynch, maybe a little bit, but not this much. Is that the year is 2020 and it's actually COVID and they're all inside their houses staying away from each other. But she doesn't seem too concerned when she opens the door, so probably not.
Yeah, I was feeling that because that's when I first watched. That's when I first.
Yeah,
watched.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, this feels familiar.
Yeah.
You know, Anthony, the fact that you heard all that information from Mary Reber is really interesting to me, that Lynch wrote the scene apparently, or was revising the scene just before they shot it. It certainly makes you wonder, it makes me wonder what the scene was supposed to be. It makes perhaps who was supposed to play whatever character. We don't even know. We can't even know if there was supposed to be someone. Did they walk in the door and she screams? I mean, we just don't know. I'm not sure Mark Frost knows. So we'll never know.
Yeah, I like to think I keep bringing this up. So sorry if I brought it up in the previous one, but another, and this is actually a theory I do actually have wonder about if it's true. You know, Lynch takes input from various places. We know he watched Mad Men, and there's a scene a couple episodes before Mad Men ends that aired right exactly during the time he was on that hiatus from Showtime, when he was negotiating a new contract, or not a new contract, but getting them to give him the budget he wanted. And this episode aired, and it has like Dawn going to a house looking for somebody at this random house. A different person shows up at the door. Like he's wearing a suit, and there's just this whole imagery, and it almost makes me wonder if that sparked something when he was at this moment of kind of crisis, and that got added to the script after the fact. Again, total speculation, but I find it interesting to think about. And there's other things too, which I feel like I'm not even remembering about that scene that made me think when I was, because I watched that actually after The Return several years later, and was struck by that, the similarities there and that setup. But yeah.
Interesting.
I would like to, I guess I wasn't planning on this, but does anybody have a thought on what that line means? I kind of, in our private communication, I titled this chat that we're going to talk about the what year is this scene? Any thoughts on what that what that question means? What year is this?
To me, I kind of read it as, you know, I mean, as we talked about, Cooper is, you know, confused, and the scene kind of masterfully, like Lynch kind of masterfully directs that by stripping everything down. Like, it's so minimalist. But to me, like that line, it's him trying to kind of parse kind of where he is and when he's ended up. Like, he's trying to trace back the lineage of the house. Like, it came from there's a Tremont living here, and it came from the Chalfonts, and it was the Palmers. You know, like, what year is this? Sort of. That's how I interpret it.
Yeah, I can see how he got to the question, but I don't know. Maybe it's just maybe that's the Blue Rose Task Force, just a wake up call. Like, hey, if you're in trouble, what year is this? Just ask yourself. Snap you right out of it.
There's something too, I thought it was connected to his body motion. You know, he has that moment where he starts leaning forward kind of, and I kind of felt like you know, you see all the characters, the whole unification of Dougie and Mr. C and everything, but in that moment he was leaning forward, which I kind of got a Dougie vibe, and he starts doing that thing with his hand, which just reminded me of when he was trying to open the curtain. And I think he opens the curtain and he comes out, so he has an idea at that moment when he exits the lodge where he is, or what year it is, and he's doing that thing, maybe like Andrew said, he's going through the timeline, and then he's retracing his steps, and he does the hand thing with and here he is, and it just seems like a natural question, because he really thought he was in a different time and space and place and universe.
Yeah, that's what it seems like to me too, and kind of like what John was talking about. There's this, you know, we don't see anybody, and it doesn't seem like the Twin Peaks that we know. Seems like the maybe it's the current Twin Peaks, you know, Snoqualmie and North Bend, but yeah, it seems like he's like you were saying, Allison, like completely out of time and space. Like, this is something other dimensional, maybe not the Red Room itself, but something else. And so that's kind of how I interpret it too, is not just like the chronological years of like who owned it. I think that plays into it, but also this idea of like where are we in time? You know, what year is this? Where are we in this year?
Right.
Yeah, that's cool. I hadn't thought about him like kind of rehearsing or sort of, reliving previous moments, sort of reenacting them in his mind. That's cool. I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying, I've written about the scene, and I do have a theory that they've kind of reached the end of time, and that's part of why Cooper says, "What year is this?" But there is a curious behind the scenes bit of information that's worth thinking about, and that is when Lynch is directing McLaughlin, when McLaughlin shows up in part 17 and he runs into the sheriff's station, sort of the heroic, he's going to come and save the day. As McLaughlin's running in, he looks to Lynch and he says, how am I supposed to respond? Like, hey, Sandy, or something like that. Or I forget what McLaughlin says, but Lynch says clearly, no time has passed for you. So for Cooper, in Lynch's mind anyway, Cooper's been in a stasis since he left, since he went into the Red Room. And really, arguably, no time has passed. So for Cooper, it's like the next morning. He went into the Red Room, and then he comes out. Of course, he's talking. He thinks he's talking to Harry Truman, and he has the coffee on as they're driving into Twin Peaks. He no time has passed for him. So that feeds into this. What year is this?
Today, I took my kids to watch Spirited Away, which is a great Studio Ghibli movie, and at the end of the movie, they end up the characters end up where they started, and they end up back at their car next to this tunnel, and it just looks like time stood still for a moment. But then they get to the car, and the car is like covered with dust, so it's been there for a long time. So it's like a nice little twist on that time stood still thing. Very cool. But I was amused by that today. I'm going to share my screen and if this ends up not being that interesting, so be it. The other segment I was thinking of was kind of looking at storytelling techniques, and if we wanted to pull apart, all that's available to a storyteller. These are just some of what's available. And my question is there anything here that anybody feels is worth discussing or valuable in some way?
For me, tension sticks out. Like this scene is one of the best, to me, directed moments in Lynch's career, and part of it's because he like everything we've said so far, from how it so deeply roots us in Cooper's perspective as someone who he is confused as we are confused, and he captures this so well, almost by clearing everything out. Like it's almost aggressively minimalist, just like a simple, over the shoulder exchange, mostly between Cooper and or Kyle and Alice Reber, and that simplicity, the way it puts us on edge, and then that's like compounded by like the very subtle and nuanced camera movements you can almost only do with like a digital camera. So like as we are wondering where's this going, and Cooper's wondering where's this going, and there's just that slightly ominous lilt and shift in the camera, especially like what Patrick said, when it's you're kind of walking up toward the house. I mean, it just makes the scene, the complete, just the minimalism makes the scene so tense, like you're almost on edge, like waiting for something that it obviously pays off at the very end. But it's a masterpiece to me, or masterclass in like minimalist tension in terms of filmmaking.
Plus, we're all looking at the clock too, knowing that it's it sure is winding down at this point. Yeah, that's cool.
It's ending.
Yeah, please.
Like, I was just saying, it's ending. That was the worst part about it. I just, something's not quite right, and you're looking at the clock. You're like, they've got 2 minutes left to wrap this up. What? This is it? It's just crazy. I don't think I've ever felt that way watching anything. That was just a great, I'll never forget like that night because I watched it when it aired. That was just, I think I always, in my head, I look back to how part 17 ended because, you know, they aired in the same night. And I'm pretty sure I was just jumping up and down at the end of 17. I was like, what is going on? This is crazy. Let's go, part 18. And then 18, I'm sitting there and I'm like, what is going on? Let's go.
Yeah, I mean,
Completely
I
different.
I was so happy to hear everybody kind of say, because that's how I felt. Like once they're in the car and they've like got gas, and that's when I'm starting to realize this is almost over. You know, what's happening?
Mhm.
Like what's
Right.
going to happen? And because just like the original show back in the day, you know, there's a
Mhm.
really big maximalist episode, you know, Miss Twin Peaks. It's a pageant, and then there's Linda Murrow's Lovely, and then it cuts to this very kind of you know, quiet and minimalist thing, and then they do the same thing 25 years later, and it just, yeah, had me thinking like, where is this going, you know? And I started just get really unnerved at that point around then.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Um, any other storytelling like decisions that you guys find interesting in any way? Because I mean, I guess decisions could be made about all of these different elements.
Well, I have some. I feel like a lot of my remaining thoughts on the scene are probably more context driven, so I'll save it for that because I know we're doing a context section near the end.
Yeah, I would say go wherever you guys want.
Well, I guess to the extent it overlaps with the storytelling idea,
Mhm.
I find it interesting how there we go. I find it interesting how this parallels with the end of part 17. So the Harley Payton suggested this idea first. I think he was one of the writers on the original series and kind of said, you know, he sees part 17 as Frost's version and Lynch's as more part 18. And they really do have similar story structures in a way. And, you know, leading us to this point where they both ends with scenes of Cooper and Laura together, quote unquote, going home in some sense. And then a disruption and a scream, and a scream that seems to be spurred in some way by Sarah, by her smashing the portrait in part 17 and her voice calling for Laura in part 18. And so it's just interesting how if you look at kind of the bones of those two very different episodes, they're kind of have a similar structure to them, I guess.
Mhm.
They definitely do. If you look at the parallels between 17 and 18, it's not only certainly what you mentioned with Laura and Cooper and the scream at the end, but also the fact that in both 17 and 18, Cooper reunites with Diane, and there's this whole sequence with Diane in both episodes.
Mhm.
I would argue in 17 she's an idealized Diane, and in 18 she's a real Diane, but that's a whole different story. But it's fascinating how 17 and 18 parallel one another.
Yeah, and it actually takes me back. I've had at times my screen shut off. I spent basically the entire time that you were asking about what year is this, desperately looking in the Conversations with Mark Frost book by David Bushman, sorry, for a quote that I can't find of Frost answering a question about that line, what year is this? And I believe what he said, I wish I had it right in front of me, is something to the effect of, yes, it was always scripted to end that way, but something like maybe in a different context or maybe a different way. And so I wondered, was that supposed to be what Cooper says when Laura disappears in the woods and he's looking around and he says, what year is this? And then cut to black, and that's the end of the series. And I feel like that's a little bit reinforced recently by Frost tweeting out about how he thought that maybe that would be originally when they were writing, that would be the end of the series, that it would actually end even before that with him taking Laura away, and you see the town changed, and it's like it ends on almost a hopeful note. And then Lynch was the one who said, no, I think we need to show the consequences of trying to change this story, that it doesn't work out. You know, I'm paraphrasing here. I thought it was fascinating, first of all, that Frost said that. Actually, I don't think it was a tweet. It was an interview or something he gave recently, which was probably more than he said about the writing of this and the changes and the differences with him and Lynch, or, in this case, he agreed with Lynch, but it was Lynch's idea. That's like more than I've seen him say since that Conversations book, and in some ways even more than he said in the Conversations book. So I thought that was fascinating. I do wonder sometimes because that's kind of a more logical place in some ways for Cooper to ask that, because there's all this hype about go back to 1989. You're back in 1989. Here's Laura. Oh, wait, now she's gone. You're alone in the woods. Did you just skip through time? What year is this? So I wonder if that was like a second phase after they decided, okay, Laura's going to be, we actually are going to have some consequences for her to, for him to be trying and rescuing her this way. If then it was going to end with that. And then they added on more Part 18, and then Lynch added more to that. I'd love to see all the drafts of this. I'd love to see even one draft of this.
That's kind of interesting to me because after watching it a couple times in a row in the last 2 days, I'm very attached to The Secret History of Twin Peaks. And even though The Dark Roads is Lynch, I felt like in the scene where he and Laura are driving to Twin Peaks, I felt like there was a lot of Mark Frost in that. I don't know why, it just felt like that to me. There was the whole Man in Black kind of feel to it, and the headlights in the back coming through the rear window, which, obviously there's all the UFO lore, but I kind of this time was thinking of it like it almost, the big round, it looked like owl eyes. I'm building maybe a little too much on it, but it had a little bit of Frost in it to me. So I'm surprised. I mean, not surprised, but I thought what I felt was a real combination of the two. And then to hear that Lynch rewrote the scene at the end, I mean, that's not surprising to me because we know he does that. And I think Mark Frost has talked quite a bit about how he changed scenes that they had written together.
I think he did. He does say in the book, in the interview, that they mapped out some of the Carrie stuff together. So I feel like if what I'm thinking is true, that was the last line, maybe then Lynch came back and said, wait, we should do even more or something. This is all speculation, of course.
Yeah.
But also he does say in the book, and now we're getting a little off, so maybe we should stop here. But he does say in the book, we mapped out the Carrie stuff, but the Richard and Linda was all Lynch. I have no idea what that was.
Yeah, right.
Like he flat out says, and I don't know if he means by that just the use of the names Richard and Linda or all of the Diane Cooper stuff. I would not be surprised if because Diane feels very much like a Lynch character, like she's hardly in the final dossier except Tammy says something like, what was up with that? Don't even get me started on that or something. Like it feels like some of that came in from Lynch. I don't know. But,
Joel, I found the quote. It was from Variety.
Okay.
Just a couple. It was a couple weeks ago.
Thank
it was the
you. I was
anniversary
kept flipping. Yeah, I couldn't.
Yeah,
find
from
it.
the anniversary. I think it was of the pilot airing. They did an interview with him, but he said, talking about the ending, if they were comfortable with, basically how it ended. He said, I think, and it's pretty much what you said, but he said, I think we were happy with where it ended up. I thought we might end it slightly earlier, initially with the disappearance when Laura doesn't die, and we discover that things haven't been set right. But David reminded me, and rightfully so, you're not supposed to go back and fool with history. It's almost written in stone. And when we thought about it, in a way, revealed Cooper's tragic flaw, which is that he can't leave well enough alone, and he thinks there's always a wrong to be righted and somebody to be saved.
That's a fascinating way of putting it, too, because, I mean, to be fair to Cooper, from his perspective and what he knows, and understandably, even from a lot of people who see Fire Walk with Me, it's like, well, there is a right to be wrong. There is obviously something that's not well enough, and blah, blah, blah. But I think where the scene sort of feels wrong, and now we're talking about the end of Part 17, but
right.
where that scene, and again, it pairs with Part 18, so it's not totally off topic. I feel like where that scene feels wrong on some level is, depending what you take away from Fire Walk with Me. To me, Fire Walk with Me is ultimately, as dark and troubled as it is, the victory of Laura Palmer. It's her taking control of what she's being put through. And, I think they established that on the show as well. So even though Frost wasn't that involved with Fire Walk with Me, that's actually an idea implanted in episode 16. I think it's fleshed out a lot more interestingly in Fire Walk with Me, but it's there from the beginning that she was not overwhelmed by Bob in the way that Leland was. He says she was strong, and all of that. So I think for both Lynch and Frost, they had an understanding that Laura, that in that moment of suffering, she accomplishes something as well. And it's her accomplishment. And Cooper, by rescuing her in that way, is sort of taking something away. And I always love that quote in episode 29 when the arm, as we know him now, points to Cooper when he's walking into the Red Room and he says wrong way. And there's this idea, it's not even that you're going in the wrong direction necessarily, you're doing it in the wrong way. And I think that is probably Cooper's problem in the moments of the narrative, basically most of the climactic moments, where he may have the best intentions, but something is wrong in his mindset or approach, which to Lynch in particular is very important, almost maybe more important in the sense that if you go in with the right mindset, you'll do the right thing. It'll naturally follow. Like that's the order of things, I think, for him. So yeah, getting a little off topic, but I think to tie it into part 18, I do feel like at the end it's significant that Laura is the one who kind of breaks through there, not Cooper, which I think is consistent with all of those other moments in the narrative as well in some way. And looking at it and Firewalk Movie's place in that whole. Like I feel like part 8.
This is
sorry.
This is the chance to actually
the context.
We actually did an hour on the scene, and we stayed contained within those 7 minutes of the show. So I think congratulations.
We can branch out now.
But now we could open it up like totally. So
yeah,
I was just curious, just because I've never met Courtney before. I wanted to offer you, if any of this stuff jumped out as like maybe like an interesting, like, I don't know, starting point, feel free. If not, feel free to pass.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually jump off what Joel was talking about too, with how much like Fire Walk with Me factors into season 3, and John has talked a lot about this too, like how much of season 3 is Cooper's story and Cooper's point of view, that we're kind of following him, and even that last scene too, we're kind of like focusing on him, and then all of a sudden it reverts, it changes back to Laura Palmer. And to me, Twin Peaks, me personally, it's always been about Laura Palmer's story. That's the thing that has always, like, I've always kind of globbed onto. And so for it to end up, one of the things that you had put up earlier was this word of resolution. And I know I watched part 18 with a group of people, and many people were like, that's it, that there's got to be another season, there's got to be, and I was thinking to myself, I was trying to process that, the whole return, but also that last scene. What is the resolution? And I feel like there is a resolution, not in the way typically, a series would end. But the resolution is, Laura Palmer waking up, but also the audience waking up, reminding the audience this is really what it's about. In my interpretation, it's really about the story of Laura Palmer and what happened to her, and nobody can erase that. Even Cooper trying to go back in time can't erase that. And to me, that was a really powerful resolution. Maybe not the resolution everybody wanted when they watched The Return, but that's what stood out to me.
Can you say a little bit more about the audience waking up, like sort of just like snapping us back out of the story back to the Laura situation? Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. So we're following along. I mean, one of my favorite films is film kind of styles. I love horror films, is found footage. And I loved found footage because you really are experiencing what the characters are experiencing. And in The Return, you really are experiencing what Cooper is experiencing. So you're following him, but then all of a sudden that last scene it reverts back to that scream, that awareness, that awakening with Carrie Page, Laura Palmer. It wakes us up in a way. It changes our point of view because we're no longer focused on Cooper. We're focused on Laura's story. We hear Sarah's calling her name. We see the house, the lights go out, no electricity. And then I think for us as the audience who've been following the story and wanting to find different things in the return, many of us are looking for nostalgia or looking for the Red Room or looking for, different things. And I think it comes back to, for me, my interpretation, this is Laura's story. And so it's reminding the audience of what happened to her, and that can't be erased. So we are also participants in the story because we are reacting to it. We're following the point of view of the characters.
Yeah.
Something that
That's
sticks
interesting.
out to me, like something that almost goes off what both Joel and Courtney were just saying. I mean, my interpretation is essentially the same as Courtney. I mean, Dale's great, but Laura is the one, right? In both part 17 and 18, it's like they both end around the same core idea, which is Dale taking Laura by the hand to take her home. Part 17, I mean, almost feels like explicitly would erase the events, that we're going to follow that night, February 24th. But part 18 revisits the same concept, but almost in the context of Laura's spiritual transcendence that we see in Fire Walk with Me. So it's just interesting how they both come back to that same core idea, but almost in radically different contexts, emotionally, to me at least.
Yeah, and Andrew, you've talked too about that idea that I kind of agree with. We were talking about this in DMs recently. The idea of Laura in part 8 when she's in the sort of the ball and so this iconic image in a way that feels less like it comes before her story than after. Like it's, in the broader text, it's this idea of like recognizing what Laura now means because of Fire Walk with Me to so many people. Mm-hmm. And, kind of, I guess, going off that idea, I feel like the return is interesting because in many ways it's very unlike Fire Walk with Me, but it's very like aware of Fire Walk with Me. Like it feels like if there's, to use Lynch's metaphor of the donut in the hole, maybe mangle it a little bit. It's like the return is the donut and Fire Walk with Me is the hole. Or maybe vice versa. But
At the risk of getting random, I had a thought yesterday that the Chalfant and Truman name showing up in that scene is like very absurd and almost ridiculous. And today when I watched the scene, I did not have the shock of hearing her say that her name was Alice Truman. But when she says that the first time you see it, it's like that was the bone chilling part for me.
But you have to know if you're going through a watch the first time and you've never rewatched. Just saying that. I'm saying this from experience of making a friend watch it for our podcast. Like I wouldn't think to know or remember because it had been however many episodes and movie prior. You got to know.
Yeah,
yeah.
Crazy. Deep peaks for sure.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and but it's silly that those names, in a way, it's silly that those names show up because they only existed in references, like the audience has references to those two names, and the characters kind of have encountered those names in the past, but there's like there's almost no reason for those names to be there in that scene. This is not any sort of theory I have. I just thought it was like, I was kind of laughing yesterday thinking about it. Like I was trying to explain this to somebody else as well. The Cooper's keychain in The Return has his like catchphrase on the back. It says clean place, reasonably priced. And the keychain would absolutely not have that. It's silly. So John and maybe some others as well have speculated that that's almost evidence that this is happening in a character's mind, maybe. Or it's like taking existing, real life information and maybe repurposing it. And I'm wondering if that's happening also with the Chalfant and Truman names. Like, is this sort of in somebody's, repurposing what's happening in somebody's head? similar to how, and sorry to ramble on, but John and Joel were suggesting this when we talked about Mulholland Drive, that Dan at Winky's seeing like the scary thing behind the garbage can is sort of an example of that, like taking a real life experience and then like reimagining it or twisting it up in your mind, and it somehow shows up again. But I don't know, that was just the random thought that I had recently. But
the interesting thing about the Tremont Chalfant comment, it's sort of Patrick sort of gets at it a little bit, is Cooper doesn't recognize those names. He heard them before, though. He heard them, past in months. And so if Cooper is representing in some way, at some level, Cooper is the audience, then, and the audience is not familiar with all the deep lore of Twin Peaks, then they're just as confused, or it doesn't mean anything to them, Chalfant Tremont, because it doesn't seem to mean anything to Cooper. And you would think that Cooper, if it was Cooper, or is the Cooper we remember, would immediately be alerted to this. Okay, this is clue. I need to pursue this further, but he doesn't.
I think the Cooper, before going back in time in part 17, I think if it's like what you said about the direction Lynch gave him, where no time has passed, he'd know those names. But when crossing over in 18, it just gets foggy. It's just
you just see no recognition. I watched it. I watched it over and over again, and there's just no recognition at all. And it's a great scene.
Another random thought I had was that Carrie Page is the only like sort of Tulpa type character that's able to break out of like the programming, and I have since dismissed this idea as stupid, but that's just one of the random thoughts I had, because it's fun to think about. It's fun to think about this show, like, because you see Diane saying I'm at a sheriff's station and she's freaking out, and it seems like almost she's able to break out of the Tulpa Diane thing happening there, but not quite. She's not able to. And like that maybe Carrie / Laura is the first one who's able to overcome that. But I've looked into it. It's stupid.
Well, I kind of wonder.
Did anybody else have like fun thoughts?
I'm actually curious. Well, I'm actually curious to follow up on that. The idea of Carrie as a Tulpa, I feel like that's like a interpretation people made, and it makes sense in a certain way. And I wonder what if it holds up to scrutiny or not? Because I think about it and I'm like, tulpas are always created for a purpose. So who created this version of Carrie and why? And when I think about it that way, it's like, I don't know, because she doesn't, like, yes, to get her away, but like usually the tulpa, as far as I can tell, they serve a purpose for someone else. They serve a purpose for the person making them.
They're always kind of like a smokescreen, is how I see it, right? It leads somebody off a path.
I don't know if I want to get like real into it, but if you see like the gold ball that that I guess tulpas are made from, I do think a lot about the firemen creating, or I hate to say creating, but using a gold ball with her face on it. I feel like I bring that, maybe it's just because I've said it on my podcast, and I just feel like I bring it up a lot, but it's so stuck in my head. There it is, and it's so silly that it's one of these little details that I feel like I just go crazy about. But that's the good thing about the show. I feel like you're allowed to do this, but like when Cooper or Richard is arriving to Carrie Page's house, they kind of pan over the yard, and there's a little gold ball in the yard, like in her, and I'm just like, is that like, is that like, is she a tulpa? That was what made me think about it, and that's what like really made me start thinking about Carrie Page being a tulpa, is just connecting like some dots there. But that's just me being crazy.
Yeah, it's fun though.
It's fun, yeah.
because
My favorite. I was
it
gonna say my
could get a
favorite.
little too
Sorry.
it could get a little too like over analytic. Well, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but it could get like analytical, and you could drive yourself crazy and whatnot. But it's got to be fun too, and sometimes those little fun, goofy thoughts that slip through are they're gold. I'm sorry, Joel.
They're gold.
Yeah.
I was just
they
gonna
are.
say my favorite example of that sort of like weird objects resembling something else is also in part 18 when Cooper drives out from the motel and there's just a shot of this lamp post and this tree, and it's like that looks like the two halves of the evolution of the arm. And I feel like everybody had that thought watching it, and everyone was like, nah, that's crazy. But then like we realized we all had the thoughts, so maybe there was something to it.
That made
I-
sense to me if it was just
Yeah.
like anything Black Lodge related to this
Yeah.
world that they're now in. I love that, and I'm into that.
Well,
I
it's
thought
funny
that-
too.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, keep going.
No, I think that's all I had.
We talked about this maybe with, I think, Mulholland Drive, but that idea of like going to the kind of, the reality, so to speak, that's the template for this more mythical thing, more, dreamlike world or whatever. And it's like, I always wonder, like, what the world in part 18, in some ways, it seems like it's that, like it's the like more mundane reality that fuels this dream world. Like even something like that evolution of the arm thing. It's like, take these sort of mundane objects and turn them into this strange mystical creature or something. But then in other ways, it feels like that end of part 18 is the dream world. Like, why are they driving all night? Why is there nobody at their houses? It's just an interesting way that he plays with that dynamic that he uses in other films a little more straightforwardly, if you can say that about Lynch or Mulholland Drive. But in some ways, it's like the more straightforward version of what he does in the Return, or in part 18 specifically, maybe in relation to the rest of Twin Peaks. But yeah,
It's like it goes almost off what John was saying. Like they've reached arguably not just the end of time, but the complete collapsing of like space and consciousness, into one kind of uncanny kind of local, like world.
Well, keep talking, please.
Yeah, it's like, like if part 18 is like, they've traveled to the end of time, it's like not only have they done that, they've traveled to a place where like everything has broken down. Everything is at once more normal, but also more strange and otherworldly than ever, and it somehow feels like it could be anywhere, but also it's always night, and there are all these, as normal as it seems, we're thinking about the arm. They're mentioning Chalfonts, there's little horses everywhere. They eat at Judy's. It's like all the kind of uncanny kind of nature. It's like collapsed into one thing. And it's like hard to parse. Unlike Mulholland Drive, where you can kind of parse the reality from the dream.
It's a great word, uncanny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just to make a brief comment about you're talking about the tulpas. Just to go back to that, without getting bogged down in the mythology of Twin Peaks itself and what a tulpa is. Somebody mentioned Diane trying to break out, and maybe Laura breaks out, whatever that means. There's a fascinating line in The Return that I keep coming back to, and that's when Charlie says to Audrey, "Do I need to end your story too?" And subtextually, I think in The Return, one of the themes is storytelling, and whether or not this is a retelling of a story, or whether or not this is acknowledging itself as fiction. It was a television series. I mean, we've touched on a few of these ideas. I'm just fascinated with the idea that these characters are living a story, and maybe they're trying to break out of their story. What that means, I don't know. Whether it means they're literally breaking out and acknowledging that this is fiction, and signaling to us, the audience, that we maybe shouldn't take it so seriously, or whether or not it's just simply the idea that we can get trapped in a narrative, we can get trapped in some sort of let someone else define our story for us. I do think that Cooper defines Diane's story for her for a long time, and then she finally breaks free from him. I mean, this is something I would like to perhaps return to and write about sometimes. This idea of storytelling and characters within stories, and maybe being aware that they're within a story and trying to break out of it. Those elements are there. I haven't assembled them yet, but when you mentioned Diane breaking out, it triggered that idea again.
And that, I mean, many have even pointed out that almost becomes reinforced at the very end, right? With Mary Raber, who owns the house, being the person there, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, she also told me there was, at least for her scene, there was no extra footage, because I was wondering if, you know, if there was any cut footage possibly, and I forget. She told me some other cool things, but I forget. This is a, we could be doing other things. We're doing this. This is sort of as far as characters in a story, you know, I can't quite grasp what I'm trying to say, but I mean, we are characters in somebody's story, be it our own or some combined story or something. I mean, maybe somebody else is moving us around. I don't think so, but John, I did see everybody's head like really nodding a lot when you went there, as far as being trapped in a possibly a narrative, as maybe a theme that's happening in this text. Everybody related. So if you were to write about that, I think you'd have people wanting to read it, you know.
I don't know. They're all nodding because they're sleepy when I talked about it.
That's not true. That's not true. I think anybody who struggles with codependency would find a lot of truth in that topic, and I would love to read about it.
Rich topic, and it's fascinating. Comes into the Audrey story like that, and then she says, "What story is that, Charlie? Is it the story of the little girl who lives down the lane?" There's a lot you can unpack there, and I find it very interesting.
Totally true, and also just what you talked about with Diane too. I mean, I've listened to your podcast and heard you talk about Diane, and I think, you know, there's just such a rich, deep well of possibility with that character. And again, even, you know, watching it this time, I saw it in such a different way this time. It really is. I have heard people over the years of being interested in this, heard people talk about watching it with headphones on. Maybe not necessarily on a computer, but with headphones, because I've always just watched it on the TV, and my TV doesn't have a great speaker on it. And, you know, I did it in the interest of just I was up early this morning, so not waking my husband up, just watching it on my computer with the headphones. And that scene of the two of them at the hotel is just, I know it's a little off topic here, but it's so powerful, and it just has so many layers to it. And again, one thing leads to the next thing on this path that Richard Cooper goes on to complete the story as we know it. And yet it's totally incomplete.
You know, like, I just got this nice new like surround thing, you know, so when I was watching the scene, yeah, it was like a whole new world, you know, just for this, you know. And like, and I had never noticed before that, like, in that final scene, like Joel had said way earlier, there's kind of your kind of normal gnat sounds for night, you know, like crickets and some normal stuff, but like the trademark ominous whooshing doesn't really start to pick up until after he asks, "What year is this?" Cuts to Laura, and then, I mean, there's just so many cool little things you notice, you know.
Yeah, it's you know, fans should do it. I would definitely recommend it now to anybody who was going to be new to it, is to listen to it at least once in headphones, for sure.
I had an idea once and I never went through with it, and maybe someday I'll do it because it's just silly. I was just going to listen to all of the return and not watch it. I was just gonna listen to this. I took the fireman's call literally. I was gonna listen to the sounds. I was just gonna play just listen to it all the way through, see if I catch anything without watching. Maybe make a note.
There's no doubt that the sound is crucial in Twin Peaks: The Return, but Lynch uses sound to signal a lot of things to us. And I've been writing about Mulholland Drive. I promise I will not go into detail. But one of the things I've been doing is listening to how he uses sound to cue certain things. I'll just give a very, very quick example. Before Betty first appears in Mulholland Drive, there's a scene before that where telephones are being, there's a series of phone calls that happens. And the last call is Diane Selwyn's phone. And it rings. And then that ringing sound echoes into the air. And Betty appears as if she's been called into being. And I know that Lynch was deliberately using sound to imply or to convey information. And he does it in Twin Peaks: The Return. When Cooper and Carrie cross the bridge, there's for the first time, I think, in the episode, there's sort of an ominous sound. There's sort of this signal that they have crossed a threshold, and Lynch conveys it through sound. So the idea of listening to the whole thing, just listening to it, I think is worthwhile.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Actually, the end of the Mulholland Drive thing with the phone sort of echoing into the airport, because it reminded me, one thing I forgot to mention with the sound in this that I noticed was just how her scream extends, but it then it reverberates in a weird way. It becomes like a different sound that I can't even quite pinpoint, but it's not a natural echo. It's like a modulated reverberation and that eventually goes into the final music that plays under the image of her whispering in his ear. But there's something about the way that scream goes out that reminds me of that moment you're talking about in Mulholland Drive, almost in reverse in a way, where you're going from the human, in Mulholland Drive's case, maybe more the human image, but the human sound into the mechanical kind of sound or something more otherworldly.
Yeah, that's cool. And Patrick, I would encourage you to try that out, because I have listened to 5 or 6 episodes of The Return, sound only, and it's a very cool experience.
Okay.
A friend of mine, Joseph, he's a sound designer and a musician and a Twin Peaks fanatic. He I don't know, he got really good quality sound and shared that with me. And
Nice.
it's cool because you hear a lot of things, when you shut off some of your senses, the other senses will perk up. So he also yesterday, just for fun, put a couple scenes only in black and white, including the scene we watched tonight. And watching that in black and white is a very, very interesting experience, because you just, there's things you'll notice that you otherwise wouldn't. And then just one last thing on sound. There's Matthew, who has I think he goes by Twin Peaks Sounds. He's very observant, and he has all kinds of cool things. He was just listening to the scene that we watched tonight, and a couple things he noticed were Cooper's knock. He does 6 knock. He does
7. I tried to
7
count
knock.
too. Yeah, 7.
Yeah.
I thought. Yeah.
He does 7 knocks at a steady pace.
Yeah.
And there's no answer. And then he does 6 knocks the second time, and I think it's like
Morse code.
Yeah, very much. And I forget exactly what he said, but he looked up the Morse code, and it was something interesting. But he also pointed out that he was just speculating, having fun. Maybe the 7 knocks was for somebody who wasn't home, and the 6 knocks was for somebody who was home. And David Lynch, I know he has said 6 is I think he said 6 is a bad number or ominous number.
And that
all this is just to say that tuning into the sounds, which I know, Patrick, I know you like doing anyway, is really cool. It's fun, and you'll hear things you otherwise wouldn't have noticed. It's neat. Yeah, I'm sorry, Joel.
The numerology, method where you add up the numbers and keep adding it till it's a single number, the Palmer House adds up to 6. So you've got that. You've got the 1 and 5 of the plug that he goes to, which adds up to 6, and of course you have the 6 electricity utility pole that's in Carrie's home, and wherever it is. It was in
Firewalk
the,
is
Which is
the-
it
interesting
was in the
because
Deer
a
Meadows
sixth,
trailer park.
Yeah.
Now
Because
it's somehow moved to Twin Peaks.
a sixth house is a house of love and harmony, and I'm into numerology of houses.
Interesting.
Isn't
Okay.
that wild? And also, a
Yeah.
four house, which is Carrie Page's house, is organized. It's absolutely the antithesis of her house. Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
yeah, numerology can apply specifically to a building. Yeah, but a four house is totally different than the Palmer house. Isn't that interesting? Or a
I was-
six?
Yeah.
I was just talking to somebody recently. I don't even know who it was now. I can't remember. It just popped into my head. Do we know for sure if that's Carrie Page's house? I just wondered about it.
Oh,
Be off topic, I know, but I'm like, or is she just staying there? And I know
oh
that,
yeah. You know,
that I think it's the dead guy's house.
that's a really good point. I didn't even think of that one.
But anyway, whatever
Yeah.
that.
No, not anyway. What the hell's going on there in that whole scene? Anybody?
Which
Anybody?
maybe that's why she doesn't
Dead
answer
guy
the phone,
included?
right? Because the phone rings and she doesn't even address
doesn't
it
even
at
pick it up.
all.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not her house. Ooh.
And therefore the gold ball outside becomes even more interesting, Patrick.
Don't
Mm.
even get
What is that? So, I mean, never mind. But what's up with the dead guy? Anybody? I love that. I love it. I mean, I just love stuff like that, where every element that could be manipulated is done so in an interesting way, whether it's like the film technique or the storytelling. That, for me personally, that's what I love about Twin Peaks. I think above all else, that if there's something that could be tweaked, and not just for style's sake, but in an interesting or elevated way or whatever, just in a fun way. If there's something available for tweaking, it's done almost all the time, I think. That's what I love. Is there anything you guys love especially about the show? I mean, you've all put a lot of time into it. It's a stupid question, it might be.
I liked the show.
So is there anything above all else, that
Hmm.
maybe that's unfair?
I love the weirdness. Someone said, before I watched The Return, like, what's your favorite thing about Twin Peaks, or what would you like to see in season 3? And I was like, the Red Room or anything like that. Anything that's just like otherworldly that blows my mind. And I like the weirdness of it.
Josh Eisenstadt and I did a panel up in Snoqualmie about part 8. And when we were talking about that and the reaction to, how some of the fans reacted to part 8, there was a group of fans who said that's not Twin Peaks. And Josh and I were like, the very fact that we had no idea what was going on in part 8 made it more Twin Peaks than anything. It is the idea that you see yourself in Twin Peaks. You got to find your way through it. We've talked about theories, and I have theories that I really feel strongly about, but there is no right theory.
Mhm.
And I think it really is, you find yourself in the show. You find out more about yourself when you watch it.
You also find a lot of other people
Yeah, that's true.
who love it, and that's a really unique thing. I mean, I fell deep head first when The Return came out, because I watched the series, I don't know, several years before The Return came out, and kind of just watched it and appreciated it and put it away. And so for me, I mean, it coincided with so many things, right? The election, and then COVID, and I mean, there were a lot of things that brought people together too in unique ways around it. But I think that the community part of it, which I had no idea even existed at all. I think I watched it, and I watched I listened to a couple podcasts, and then I found Patrick's podcast, and that was sort of the, kind of the cracking open for me of the community, was through Talking Backwards. And it's been just, I mean, it's like, I was telling my husband today that it's, it is never ending, and there is never a point at which I have felt like I'm complete. I don't ever have to watch this again. I don't ever have to read it again. I mean, Anthony, when you said you hadn't watched an episode, and I was like, oh my God. I
Since
mean,
August. Since August.
I know.
Yeah. I mean, I talk about it every day, but
Yeah, I know.
I don't
mean,
know
but
why either.
yeah.
I can't really tell you why. That's
Well, you know,
listen to it.
everybody has lives outside
Yeah.
of, but
Yeah.
for me, I mean, on my desk, I'm in my fantasy living room right now, but I mean, I'm just surrounded by Twin Peaks paraphernalia. Yeah,
Yeah, you have a hell of a collection.
I do.
And connection.
And connection.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't the stupidest question. Anybody else who just wants to say a word or two about why you love it, or is there a certain thing above all else?
I'll quote the movie Alien. He says, I admire its purity. I mean, everything that Twin Peaks does, it does with such an amazing kind of, I don't know, intensity and honesty, you know, like it's such an empathetic series, and that ties in with how, you know, just bold it is, and how I think I already said, but like how earnest it is. I mean, it's such like a wave of emotions, and the fact that it can be so emotional while also being, you know, this something that like Allison said, you're never done with it. There's always something more to think about. Just makes it kind of endlessly kind of tantalizing to me.
Yeah, I guess jumping off of what Andrew said, I agree with that, and yet also, paradoxically or whatever, I kind of love it for, I don't know if you call it its impurity, but it's like diversity, like the fact that some of the things that they didn't really work for me on first viewing, when I go back, are more and more fascinating to me, like the unevenness of season 2, the way that it, especially, and this is especially true of the original series leading into Firewalk with Me, the fact that it tells this story that it didn't know it was going to tell at the beginning, and finds its way there and gets lost again and finds its way back in an even stronger way. And then when you add the return to it, you know, this sort of, in a way, much more concentrated Twin Peaks, where it's all Lynch, it was all created at one time, and yet in some ways it's even harder to pin down than the original series, and kind of leads you back to, I think, especially back to Firewalk with Me. It just fascinates me, like all these puzzle pieces and kind of don't fit together, and yet they do. Yeah, I was kind of think of it as like a landscape. Like there's parts where you're up on the mountain peak looking out over everything and you can see it all and it all makes sense. There's other parts where you're like, the trees overhead are too thick, you can't see where you're going. You know, it's like, I love that it can contain all of that. That's kind of what fascinates me about it and keeps me coming back. If it was like less flawed, maybe, and also even if it was really great, but like all great in one specific way, I think I would have marveled at it and loved it. It would be one of my favorite things, but I don't know if I'd come back to it as often or spend as much time on it as I do, that it's so complicated like that.
Unapologetic too. It seems like they get an idea and there's no apology as far as, you know, pursuing it and executing it, and super talented people working on the show in every regard. Not that I'm any sort of critic, but I mean, I know talent when I see it. You know what I'm saying? By the way, Courtney, perhaps one of my favorite things that I've ever read, Twin Peaks related, was the Grace Zabriskie interview you did, which oh my God, man, that was awesome. That's all I want to say about that. That was
That's all her. One of the most charismatic, intimidating, and wonderful people I've ever interviewed.
She seems to fill a room. Yeah.
She's a tiny person,
Hmm.
but a big personality.
Yeah. And confident and unapologetic, and seems very warm also. Yeah. Really cool. Really cool. Patrick, you've spent a lot of hours on this show, and then getting other people into it as well, and then whether you know it or not, entertaining a lot of people who you never met. Some of us are here. What, why?
I don't know. Being truthful. Anytime I hear anything like that, I don't understand it. I still don't feel, and it's coming up on 5 years this year of us starting that podcast. I mean, we're on a hiatus now. There's a lot of ideas for some stuff, but it's just timing, and we don't want to say anything and let anyone down. But anyway, I don't know. It was an idea we had, me and my buddy Dave. It's actually his idea, but he knew that I was very into it, and we somehow convinced our other friend to watch it episode by episode. And that was the hardest thing doing the show, was just not doing spoilers,
Yeah.
for me. But it was a lot of fun. It was some of the most fun, and such a creative time, because that also like fell right into like COVID, and it was just I think that was another reason why we had some time to dedicate to it during those years. And it just kind of became unreal. We met a lot of really cool people, and then I had a crazy idea to, hey, what if we go up to Washington and like record some episodes there? So we did part 17 at the Kiana Lodge, where some of the pilot was filmed, and we did part 18 in the Palmer House living room, which was one of the craziest nights like ever. And then we did another one at the diner. And it's still, just thinking about it now, I just don't understand how we pulled it off, because it was a silly idea that I had, and we did it. And I don't know, that's one of those things that I'll always be proud of, but I still don't really understand like that it happened. So it's very crazy. So yeah, I think about it still, the show, not my show, but Twin Peaks, pretty much all the time. I've never had a show quite just take over my brain the way this one has. I think about different stuff all the time. I mean, I was thinking a little bit ago when we started talking about Fire Walk With Me stuff, I was like, oh, we didn't really even talk, like, there was some Philip Jeffries stuff with him questioning what year it was. We didn't even like dive into that. And like,
Right.
there's stuff there that I think about like all the time, but there's just all these questions that and that's just what it is. And I think about it, and I don't have those answers. So I can always speculate a million and one different things, and I feel differently about it pretty much every time I see it. I think different things every time I see part 18. I think about the ending a different way pretty much all the time. I'm like, well, it could be this, it could be that. And that's what I love about the show. Nothing's made me feel like that. So, and it's awesome to be talking to all of you. I mean, I don't feel like I should probably be here. I don't feel the most like, I don't feel like I have the most knowledge on all of it, but I love it. I do love it. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, I could relate there. One thing you just said that was really jumped at was you just said it was like a creative time, and I have found that myself. Like I'm not really much of the artsy type so much, but this show awakens something inside. It just like awakens like your creative side or some way, or if you already have that strongly, then it really just taps into it, and there are many different facets to life, and the creative facet is but one. And I like crowding out some of the other facets with like living in the sort of like the creative realm, at least. And it's sort of the show is sort of a doorway for me into that world a little bit, because other parts of life can be more of a bummer.
To say it mildly.
Yeah. So there's something to be said for that. Is there any, just to get back to the scene, can somebody summarize it? Would anybody like to just do like a brief summary of the scene that we watched together tonight?
I think if we screamed, that would be the summary.
I'm sorry, it muted just a little bit, John. Can you say that again?
I said I think if we screamed, that would be
right.
I think Courtney mentioned something about I forget. Sorry, Courtney, I can't remember exactly what you said, but about it being the end of the show, and maybe we're talking about people thinking, oh, there's going to be a season 4 or something like that. For me, it's so much an ending. It's an ending. I know it's open, and I know the story could go on. I don't think there will be more Twin Peaks. I think that Lynch and Frost, but probably a little more Lynch. This was an ending. I mean, he ended it with an exclamation mark. I mean, it's boom. And whether the story's over is a whole different thing, but the telling of the story gets you back to that story and discourse thing.
That's interesting.
So for me, I don't. But the way the story ends, it kind of motivates you to go back into it again, to want to go back and explore it some more. I think that's the beauty of the way this story ends, is you want to return to it. There's a lot of series that end with great, wonderful endings. Better Call Saul was on last year. It was a wonderful ending. We're all happy to see how it all came out, but we're done with it. We're done with the show pretty much. The ending of Twin Peaks: The Return is an invitation to go back and watch it again. So I guess that's how I would sum it up. And with that, I probably also have to tell you, time for me to end. I have some things I need to attend to, so
Yes.
I'm probably going to have to get out of here right now. But
Feel free to
thanks for
scream.
say again.
Feel free to scream if you'd like. John, thank you very
Great.
much. Yeah.
Thanks to see everybody again.
Yeah.
It's great to see all your faces, and
Definitely.
time, I hope.
Good to see you, John.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah.
Take care.
See you, John. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Before other people start dropping out, and I'm good for whatever. Another thing that you guys were saying, I think probably a mix of everybody, was how it just gets inside, like the show kind of gets inside, and it's hard to like shake it. So recently I've been thinking about like the persuasion in this show, or the persuasion skills that David Lynch has, and that's just that's like the book that I would want to read about Twin Peaks if somebody had the skills to analyze that persuasion, even like hypnosis, because it's very hypnotic in a way. And I've really never seen, I mean, I haven't seen many other things that get the hooks in, in the way that this does, and the depth that this does. So that's just like a little pet topic that I have in mind, maybe to discuss some other time, or I don't know. I'd love to see somebody do like a video, like a YouTube video type thing on that topic. But does anybody have any snap thoughts or quick thoughts on like just the persuasiveness?
That's an interesting, like the idea of it getting its hooks in you. It's funny. I was just thinking this when John was talking, because he overall, I think, has been probably like in the Twin Peaks, and certainly like actively like commenting on it for the longest of all of us here. It's back to, when I was 7, he was
Right.
doing, or he was writing about the show or whatever. But I was thinking it's funny because I spoke to him. He was one of the first people I think the first person I ever interviewed about Twin Peaks on my site when I was kind of getting into writing. And he'd kind of fallen out of it a bit. It was like a couple months before the Missing Pieces, and then that kind of got him back into it, and the announcement of the return and all that. So I'm thinking it's in terms of like nonstop, just being in the Twin Peaks world. I've been in it at this point for like a decade, because in 2014, before the Missing Pieces or anything, there was like an essay book that I happened to order to fill like a Barnes and Noble cart. And I was like, oh, I haven't watched Twin Peaks in a while. This will be a good thing to kind of like read next. And I opened it. Within a month, I was watching the whole series again, and the ball has never stopped rolling since then. So it's like, there is something, and there's times where I've almost like wished I'm ready to move on, but it hasn't let go of me yet. I still have projects I got to finish that I got to see them through. And, I thought they'd be done 2 years ago, a year ago. Now it's like, well, maybe in a few years. So there's something about Twin Peaks that's unlike, because I've had various obsessions in my life, but I never had anything. I don't know if it was the time in my life or what, but for answering that question for me personally, it's like there's something, and almost even the fact that it got me right at the right time in my life doesn't feel like a coincidence, like there was just something in the air, the magnetic forces took hold. So that's I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of my description of the phenomenon, I guess. I totally know what you're talking about. We've talked about it, and I think everybody here knows exactly what you're talking about as well. And I love the fact, like John was saying about other shows and Patrick was saying about other shows, it's like there are some really great shows out there. Some shows that are even maybe more like consistent than Twin Peaks, but it's like you take part in that work. It's wonderful. You experience it. You move on. You can't quite move on from Twin Peaks, and it really inspires active participation. Like it's not something you sit back and you admire and say, there it is. That's brilliant. I have nothing to add to this. How could I add to that brilliance? Instead, it's like, yeah, this is brilliant. And I now have something I want to like throw into the pot and mix in. It's like, yeah. And all of us here kind of do that as well with like commenting on it. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Like there almost has to be something flawed, like this wabi sabi type element to get people, because it's like, yeah, like what he was saying, like with Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad, like once it, like all these things that are just holistically very nice, you can like put them away. But with something where like that has these crags and elements that don't seem to quite add up, I don't know, it activates something, in the mind.
It makes you say, I can fix it.
Yeah, it really does activate the inner detective, or the curious person for sure.
And real quick, one story, since you mentioned persuasion. I first watched Twin Peaks before the Gold Box had come out, and I had to like get a friend to torrent the first season episodes, and I was showing them to another friend, and he had watched I think Mulholland Drive and Lost Highway with me, and he had kind of seen Lynch as just some kind of formalist, weirdo, not anybody who was, super, powerful in an emotional sense. We were like probably 15 or something. And it was me showing him these like torrented discs of like the pilot of Twin Peaks and the first, episode or episode, 1, which is really the second, that's what persuaded him, that Lynch is kind of a master. And we ended up watching like the whole season in one sitting. So I mean, like, yeah, there really is just something about Twin Peaks. I mean, even maybe, well, obviously for many, even relative to the rest of his work, is, despite its brilliance.
Yeah.
Anthony, I've got to head out. I could stay here all night and talk with all of you. You're all wonderful, but I've got to put my baby to bed. So I'm gonna call it a night. But thank you all. It was wonderful, and thank you, Anthony, for hosting this.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It's great meeting you, at least face to face. Good night to the little one, and
Thank you.
yeah, I hope you have a great night, great week.
Good to see you, Courtney.
Keep in touch.
Yeah, good night.
Bye, Allison. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks so much. This was really really cool of you to do this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll do it again whenever you'd like.
Okay, then we will. Cool.
See you
Sounds
tomorrow.
good. Yeah, see you tomorrow.
Exactly. We'll call you in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Like every I don't know, 2, 3, 4 times a year, I get to do something like this. So I really look forward to it, and it's nice. And I love the next couple days too afterwards, like combing through it. Well, I don't love the next hour or 3 hours, because I'm just praying that nothing goes wrong, because it has to download or it has to upload or whatever, and that takes forever. So I just sit here like biting my nails that everything works out.
By the
Well,
way,
at
there's
least we'll
like
have the memories.
Yeah.
Right.
there's a I don't know if it comes across on my video, but my light like flickers every like 30
Mm.
seconds, and I know it's like a Lynch thing probably, but I'm
It's coming
noticing it like, and I'm like I don't know what is happening. And I can't fix it. I was trying to fix it when I got in here. I was like, I look crazy.
You
I don't know what's
don't.
going on. All right.
No, that only adds.
It's
All
very
right, great.
effective.
I
Yeah.
gotta say too, for Agent Ivy, your when you mentioned that your background was like you're not your real background or something, you moved your hand, and it was the first time I'd noticed. It was
Oh,
like right
that it
when
was.
you
Oh, that it
did
was
that.
fake.
And I was like, oh,
That's
whoa,
great.
this is like, it's like you manifested that it
Yeah.
wasn't, even though you probably want to manifest it is, but
I meant to put myself in the. I meant to put myself in the lodge today. Yes, I have
Yeah.
many. I have many backgrounds for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, but it actually this one works pretty good.
Yeah, I hope I didn't mess up Anthony's video too much, because I was like, it was coming right up on 8, and then I'm like, oh wait, am I gonna do this on my phone? And I was like, so my computer setup isn't great to shoot at, so I was doing it here. So I've literally got a pile, and they're all David Lynch, Mark Frost books, almost all of them, piled up to put my phone at the right height, and
Perfect.
another thing in front and in back. So it's like, yeah, I got Laura's Ghost right there somewhere. I got the
Awesome.
conversations. Now I had to pull the conversations out of it was like Jenga. I had to pull it out of the pile to look for the quote.
You did it.
Yeah,
You
I
pulled
think
it
that the thing about having these conversations too is just that I don't have people close to me to talk to about Twin Peaks. I don't have close friends who are into it at all, other than the people who are my close friends, in the internet world. And so, I mean, I remember I was like, I was talking to an old, not a, an old friend, but someone I hadn't talked to in a while, but I wasn't in a very good mood when he called, and he said, "How are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, everything sucks, but I went on a Twin Peaks rant for like 5 minutes, and then he was like, "Well, I gotta go." He wasn't into it at all. But I mean, it's always it's everywhere. I see it in everything. My husband's always telling me like, not every show is about Twin Peaks. Like David Lynch didn't take something from every single show that we watch to do Twin Peaks, but for me, it just exists in just a timeless space.
Yeah, I can understand that completely.
I think about it a lot.
I had a friend tell me, who's a Twin Peaks fan, his air conditioner went out, and he lives like in the desert part of the country. And instead of being upset, he just sent me like a little GIF or GIF of Mr. C driving, where he's like about to throw up. And like like the part where he's driving
Yeah.
through the desert,
Mhm.
and he's like, yeah, my air conditioner went out today.
So
The point is just that, like, you have those references right at your fingertips. It can always put you in a better mood, I have found.
that's for sure.
Um, was this fun for anybody?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Totally.
Everybody.
Yeah, it's great,
For me, yeah.
Anthony. Yeah, it's really cool that you were able to bring everybody together, and that there is a time and space, everybody's so busy that everybody could come together.
Yeah, I couldn't believe we pulled it off. Like, we're able to schedule it, and everybody that I wanted to come was able to. I know Colin wasn't able to make it, but Patrick, this is the first time meeting you, and really
Yeah.
appreciate you taking the time. I know you have family
appreciate
stuff
the
as
input.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, I got the kids in bed before I started, so it worked
Patrick
out.
has 40 children.
Yeah, 40 kids. They're all sleeping. Yep.
That's cool.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm probably gonna run too. But back to the scene. I would like to offer everybody the chance to have any closing thoughts you want on the scene itself, in terms of anything like you thought or noticed, or maybe how it fits into the larger story, or really just anything at all. If you want, and if not, that's okay too.
I guess I'll start. it's interesting how, to me, it almost serves as like a remix of so many elements from the season 2 finale, where like it's very spare and very surreal. You're not really sure where it's going, and certain elements of it get remixed, right? Like I'll see you again in 25 years almost becomes, you know, what year is this, you know? And we get left with, you know, this other kind of enduring scene of like, you know, Cooper and Laura together, you know, which actually calls back to season 1. But I mean, you know, it's like a new version of the original mysteries that we got left with for so many years. And also just what somebody had said earlier about how Cooper becomes almost like a new Philip Jeffries, asking what year it is, and now he's mixed up with Judy, and they both talk about the concept of being inside a dream and who is the dreamer. Just the way part 18 builds off so many of the old threads is just endlessly interesting to me.
Cool.
Yeah, I love that.
I think I'll just say, like, I mean, and this goes back to seeing it for the first time, like the first night watching it. I didn't know what I couldn't process any of it. But I've probably rewatched it however many times, and that meaning like the whole show and various parts of it, you know, many different times, that it's maybe like just the most important scene, arguably. Like there's so, and that's the thread, like we've said too. I mean, I feel like everything I'm going to say is just repeating, but it's just the thread that keeps you going back. You know, you're just like, oh, I know I gotta watch it again. No, now I'm thinking about this again. So
Yeah.
I think I will never stop thinking about it. I feel like, I mean, because we're going on, was it 8 years now or something like that since it aired? So next month, actually, I'm realizing something like that. 7 or 8 years?
7 years, yeah.
7? Okay.
Right, it was
I was jumping
2017.
ahead.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Still, like the fact that I'm still thinking about it and talking about it just from that night where I thought, I don't know what any of that means. How am I, what am I, because that was the whole week after. I was just like looking up anything I could find. Like, what are people talking about? How's anybody else interpreting it? Because I don't get it. And then I was like, I'm going to rewatch. And that's just what I did. And that's what I've been doing. So
Still going.
still going.
Yeah.
Still going.
Here
I
we
think
are.
I have found that after, like I said, watching it a couple times over the last 2 days, that especially that scene, I mean, my husband and I watched it last night, and then today I was just really compelled to watch it again. And so there is, like John said, it's an invitation to return. You know, I don't know, just it's so compelling in so many ways. And I think a lot of that, I mean, it's the content itself, but the performances are just, I mean, I will never, and I will never not marvel at how good those two in particular were in this, and even, Cheryl had a fairly limited role, but it's just captivating. Yeah, I can't, I don't know. I don't see a time when it won't be something that I will be interested in. Yeah.
That's why they called it The Return. So we'd all keep returning
So,
to
yeah,
it.
exactly.
Yep.
It's funny with John's statement on it. I get where that's coming from. I feel like that's probably maybe the most common response is like, this is the ending. For me, it felt like the ending that night, and ever since then, it hasn't quite. And part of that could be just, you can say it as it sends you back to the show, it sends you back to Fire Walk with Me. And then there's the part of it too, I think, with the whole wisteria thing, where there was that like, oh, there is a part of me that feels like if I tend to look at the end of Fire Walk with Me as the end of Twin Peaks. Somehow it all leads back to that. And we've seen Laura's story of how she got there. And I guess what I still feel like I would love to see is what finally, and maybe it's not a story that can be told or should be told, but what finally, if we see that as being sort of outside of time or the culmination spiritually for everybody to get them in there, that moment with the angel and Cooper by her side seeming to have some sort of understanding or support. If we've seen what got her there, like what got him there. And, so I like to imagine that maybe we haven't seen the last of Twin Peaks, but maybe that's a pipe dream.
Well, it goes back to that the Variety quote, which do I still have it up? There was like a second part to that where I guess they had asked him about season 4,
hmm
and he said, "Never say never." It's a small part of it,
Yeah.
but you know that's
Interesting.
but he says, "But we haven't talked
Yeah.
about anything going forward at this point."
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I was at the Ace Theater for the Room to Dream book event where Lynch was there, and so he
Mm.
was interviewed first, and
Oh, yeah.
and then he did a book signing, which was absolutely it was so fun. But somebody in the audience asked, they were doing Q&A, asked him, was there going to be more
Mm.
Twin Peaks? Or I realized after the fact, I was just so in the moment that I wasn't recording, and I was paying attention, but I wish I had written it down. But he made a statement like something like, Carrie Page is still
Mm.
coming through the, I mean,
Mm.
and of course
It's
everyone
like
was like,
calling.
oh, you hear this
Yeah.
collective gasp in the audience. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Did
feels
he
like
say
there's
there's like
more there, yeah.
disturbances? He's like, there's
Right,
disturbances. It's
right.
calling, but there's disturbances.
Yes, yeah, like but he mentioned her name in a way that he was feeling connected to her. So I don't know. I mean, he's been silent for a while, and then
Mhm.
Michael Horst posted that picture on Instagram of the two of them together playing checkers or
Oh,
chess or
yeah.
something, right? So it was good. I felt very relieved to see him,
Mm.
you know, at least if not his tulpa. Yeah, so it would be interesting. I'm reading My Life, My Tapes right now, and I was thinking like that story, Dale's origin story, could be a really good moving picture, I think.
Yeah.
That right? That's the autobiography,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. So I think there's always a possibility, but I don't know. It's hard to say at this point, 7 years out, if anything else is going to come.
Gotta wait
And
25 years.
yeah, right. And if we need it, really. I mean, look at we're 2.5 hours in on one 7-minute scene. You know what I
Right.
mean? Yeah,
Yeah, there are so many other scenes that could carry multiple hour conversations.
for
I,
sure.
Like when James sang Just You in The Return.
it's
Why are we
possible.
laughing?
It's possible there's something wrong with us. We should never rule that out because
That is true.
I don't think so.
oh,
I'm buying it.
all right, fair enough. I will defer to you. The I don't know. It's that scene just is. It's amazing. It's a home run. It's a friggin' home run. I can't believe people didn't like it. It's a friggin' game-winning home run.
I've got a friend actually. You saying that I've got a friend who watched it when it aired. I don't think he's ever rewatched it or gone back to it.
Yeah.
I
Because of
remember
that,
him.
because of that
I don't know if
scene.
it's because of the ending, but I remember we talked about it, and this was back in 2017. So I don't know. I haven't actually talked to him about Twin Peaks in a long time, but he was just like, I don't think he liked it, and he never I was like, huh, you never wanted to just go back and rewatch it? Everybody's different.
Yeah.
For
Absolutely.
sure.
100%. I know people who just don't like any of this stuff, and that's fine. They
Yeah.
and they're not dopey at all. I mean, these are high level individuals who just can't get into any of it. Perfectly fine. I think they want a narrative to be a little more
Yeah.
A, B, C, D, E. I don't
Hmm.
know. The
What the heck?
the final thought is going to go to Andrew because he was here first, and that's it. So
That's the way it goes.
the way it goes.
Well, I guess my final thought is, well, it was very fun to do this with everyone and to get to meet so many new people and talk about the show. And I guess ultimately, I don't know that I do consider this to be like the ending. I really do feel like it just plants the seed for another continuance or mystery. The, you know, culmination of which we may never see. But to me, it is not the end. I'll always hope for more.
You heard it here. You heard it here, folks.
Yes, it was a good one.
You heard it here from Andrew. Not the end. If anybody wants to, you know, do this another time, even informally, you know, doesn't have to be recorded or whatnot, I'm always down. And I would like to thank each of you very, very much. Andrew, Patrick, Joel, Allison, Courtney, and John. Really, really do appreciate it. I look forward to these things a great deal. And, you know, as the day gets closer, it's exciting. And this happens every couple of months, you know, and it's something I've learned to not take for granted, because it's you know, you don't know if these things are going to happen again, and they're really fun. And I like listen to this stuff, you know, I'll listen to it like months later, not to like see if it was any good. I'll listen to it because it's fun to listen to.
Mhm.
And when I go back and listen to it, what all you guys had to say, you know, it's without being in this chair trying to like manage different things and being distracted, I enjoy it that much more, quite honestly. So I like it even more the next time I hear it. So anyway, that's just to say thank you.
Thank you for bringing
thank
us
you,
together.
yeah.
This was awesome.
Yeah, and I hope
Thank
you
you,
all,
Anthony.
I hope you all keep in touch.
Oh,
Mhm,
for
absolutely.
sure. Definitely.
Cool.
Nice to
Alright.
see everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You too.
Nice to meet you, Andrew.
You
Yeah.
too.
Nice to meet you, Andrew and Joel.
And Patrick, yes. I was just
Yeah.
gonna say, I
Yeah.
enjoyed your show very much.
Oh, I appreciate that.
yeah,
Made me
I
think, and it
enjoyed-
made me
and-
and it made me laugh quite a bit.
yeah.
That's. I think that might be the most compliments I've heard. Just to me is just that you made me laugh, and I'm like, great.
Humor is hard.
Yeah, I was like, it probably wasn't me. It was probably Tyler. So
No, you guys
I
all
think I
have a
did
great
anything.
dynamic.
no,
though.
it
The
was
three
very-
of you.
yeah.
It's
Thanks,
like the
yeah.
perfect combo.
I
Yeah, it
appreciate
is.
For
that.
sure.
It is. It's
Awesome.
a great vibe.
Yeah, hopefully we can do more. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Always. It's just
For sure.
we'll see.
Well, I hope all this recording worked, and if not,
Yes.
and if it didn't, I still really feel great. So,
Yeah. It was a lot
Awesome.
of fun.
All right. Thank
Okay.
you, everybody.
Bye-bye,
Have a
everybody.
good week.
Thank you. Bye bye.
See ya.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Good night. Thanks again.